I know that you work with clients and you utilize humor to reignite passion, to make the story more interesting. But what do you do when people say, I'm just not funny, which I actually find funny? But what do you do when people say, I'm not funny? How do you break down that barrier?
The first part of saying I'm not funny is actually admitting that you know how important humor is. So you're saying, I'm not funny. What am I going to do? That means, aha, I can work with you because you want the funny. The funny is there, but certain brains are meant for other things. I don't want my mechanic to be hilarious. I just want to get back on the road. But if I go to a presentation or a workshop, there is, the importance of humor is to engage the audience and be relatable.
Sometimes a little humor goes a long ways. To those people who maybe don't have the deepest sense of humor, kind of how you kind of monitor that. Because I literally just caught a few moments of Seinfeld before the show came on. And I remember that episode when he said, everyone thinks they have a sense of humor, even those who don't. So how much do you have to filter and be careful when you're speaking in front of a group with that humor to make sure that those that don't have it aren't going to feel out of place when everyone's laughing and they don't get it?
True. Well, I have the blessing behind me of having helped raise two autistic sons. Two of my stepsons are on the spectrum. And I learned so much from them that sarcasm is gray and people on the spectrum don't do gray. It's black, it's white, it's fact, it's in a book. Gray sarcasm, doesn't work. So when you pick up on that in your audience, that maybe some of your things aren't reaching or reacting, you want to kind of alter what you do, but you don't want to stop the humor necessarily. One of the things I do as a fun trick is if I say something and I can maybe tell it's not reaching, I'm going to pick on somebody in the front that this is a comics old trick here. You find that person in the front that you know is jovial. That's fun. And I know that would be one of you guys. I would tell that you've been engaged, you've been funny. I'm going to just pick on Glenn. And maybe I asked his name earlier, and that's my guy I keep going to. So if I just told a joke and I could tell it kind of hung through part of it, I'm going to go, Glenn, what that means is back in my day, we had cassette tapes. It was, oh, never mind. And then other people kind of pick up on that. So you might kind of play and find that one person. And that person usually gets a gift at the end from me too.
Is the best kind of humor, at least to take the training wheels off, is self-deprecating humor, would you say?
It is not always self-deprecating because right now is a very sensitive time. We're all very sensitive. And so I would want to know, are you doing the written word, the spoken word? Are you presenting a whole workshop? And I want to find that spot. One client I recently had, she also was doing this keynote, but she was also on my podcast. So I knew her pretty well. And something that she didn't even know was funny is that she's bilingual. And I find humor in the sense that most of us are not fluent in Spanish, and she is. And so we worked through how she could say something really, really provocative in Spanglish, but it was really asking where the bathroom is. That's funny.
Yeah.
and important to know.
That's right. Everyone laughs at El Baño humor.
For her, it works because she could say a lot of things, but she could say, where are the carrots? And it would sound amazing to me.
Agreed.
My wife laughs at me with my resort Spanish where I go, baño?
¿Qué pasa?
Well, there's an interesting thing that you actually bring up right there for everyone to see, Glenn, is the importance of body language. So why don't you talk a little bit about that, Lisa? Because I know that I work with people and I tell them, when you're in presentation mode, a little bit of funny goes a long way. It really does. And a lot of it has to do with the way that you deliver the words that you're saying. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the way you deliver the words you're saying is with body language. What has been your experience working with clients on that?
We all know that, well, my experience from being on stage for 20 years is closed arms is closed off. And I once had a director that we had such a bad habit of, because you stand, you don't know what to do with your hands. Look at photos. All men clasp their hands down in front of their belt. That's what they do, because to have your hands hanging is awkward feeling,
Right.
not awkward looking. So it's a point of paying attention to, this is closed off, but this is welcoming. And I know you've talked about that, Paul. I've seen some of your stuff. It's so important to be open. And one of my favorite things that you shared before, Paul, was the timing of it, and to know not to talk like this with your hands. I'm from Minnesota. That's what we do. So I put my hands in my lap. It's just as important as not just reading off of slides. If I want to read off your slides, just send me your slides.
Start putting one hand in your hip and then your pocket, posing all the time.
The one pocket pose.
Yeah, yeah. But
That's very JC Penney, showing you my jacket. That's very JC Penney, the one pocket.
Right. We call it casual elegance. It goes a long way. But I agree with the body language, and obviously, I think one of the most difficult. Oh, there goes the burrito in the microwave again.
It wasn't mine, not my sounder.
Every time it does that, we're going to switch positions.
Okay, there you go.
Don't you find that with people that are speaking up in front of people in any size of group that aren't confident, don't think they have the experience to do so? They'll do that and they'll speak to them instead of talking to them. You're speaking to, giving them all the data instead of having a conversation, getting some interaction, getting some relatability. And in my experience, I'd like to know what your opinion is on this. When you're doing that or seeing people doing that, the disengagement factor goes off the chart. As opposed to if I'm involved and I think you're talking to me, I'm going to listen and retain a lot more.
Absolutely. You want to include them if you can. That's one of the things I do when I'm speaking. I call myself an interactive speaker. One of the examples was pretending that Glenn was in my front row and I'm going to chat with him a little bit. But I also have questions, and they're not the kind that are right or wrong. They're going to be the kind, tell me about, does anybody have any kids? This kind of thing. I can ask you guys, have you two ever done improv? So raise your hand if you've done improv.
I have not done improv, but I have been part of a comedy troupe, but it was written. It was all written stuff. And that was back in another chapter, another lifetime.
Send me a video. So I always say that, raise your hand if you've ever done improv. Very few do. Okay, then raise your hand if you ever had a partner, a kid, a boss. Your hands should be going up at some point, gentlemen. But then yes, you have done improvisation because you've had to answer to your boss, maybe where that report is or why you were late or something. I'm not saying you should lie to your bosses. Mine happens to be a chief of police and you can't lie to them. They know me already. But the thing is you have to know that you are doing improv when your kid happens to ask in the middle of the store, where do babies come from? Not today, kid.
How many people, when they're applying for school, when they're in their school with their different types of packages, are amazed to realize that college is like buying a car. It's all negotiable.
Yes, absolutely. Great question, Glenn. I think sometimes we underestimate the fact that this is an investment, not only of time, but of money. And doing our research, I know that often we hear about there's billions of dollars lost in scholarships every year because people don't apply. It's true. Students are so tired after having to apply to the admissions process that then having to invest time in the scholarship process sometimes can continue to be overwhelming because it's mostly done in their senior year. So we're compacting everything in about a 6 or 7 month period of time to some kids that are pretty active on their campus, in their sports, in whatever activities they're part of. So we're really asking a lot of these students when it comes to having to negotiate that. And then the silent partner is the parent, and maybe sometimes not so silent if you're me. We're just negotiating that for one of our sons, and it's hard. It's hard to say this is what you've earned through your GPA and what you've earned, because of scholarships that the institution has given you. But we really want to make sure that we're looking both inside the institution you're applying to and outside and making time for it.
Is the interview process a more intrinsic part of the entire college admissions these days because of video and everything being virtual and the ease with which we can do this sort of thing?
I think we have to dissect it. We have to first see the list of your students' schools. Some schools don't ask for that. They're plain and simple. They just want GPAs and test scores in some cases, or just coursework. Test scores right now are kind of up in the air depending on the school. But they just want grades. They want the types of classes you've taken, and they're going to move forward with that. Others are going to want types of writing that have to do with specific questions or questions in general. Others still yet will want that, and why specifically their campus? What is it that you want from them? So to our intro, the clarity of why is it that you're pursuing that particular school? Those are sometimes either your private schools or specific majors you're applying to within an institution. So if you're applying to a business program that's very high end, you might have a supplement that you have to write to encourage why is it that you want to be at that particular school. Some transfer students have to, because they've already done their general education, right? So they need to jump in deep end to try and get into their major at that particular institution. So once you get to the point of where you are looking at an interview, they probably already know, the institution already knows what you want, but the issue really is they're confirming or they're looking at an aspect of your application that they want to see more developed.
You mentioned, that time in their senior year. What was kind of shocking when our girls were in school 8 years ago, 7 years ago, was how much of that has to take place either latter part of the junior or early in the senior year if you're looking academically, because those presidential scholarships and things like that are awarded in the fall, not in the spring.
Excellent point. Yes. And in some cases, some schools are actually going to ask you to do applications from current. So students have thought, okay, well, I don't really have to worry about my senior year that much, but then they have to talk about it in an application for a scholarship that are the higher end scholarships. If you're a Regent Scholar for the University of California, you're going to be interviewed about those activities and what has been the outcome of what you've written, a few months ago. I don't want to hear the story about how you became a leader. I want to hear the story about how leadership has either influenced you in a certain way or you've influenced that position of leadership and how that's moved you. Your creativity, that's not just for the performing arts. That could be you being that patient person that listens to your friends and gives them creative thoughts on how to be XYZ. So I think a lot of the questions give the impression that they have to be very specific. But I really do think that students really have to own the question, and then the response will come based on what their lived experiences are.
That's really a big problem with both college admissions, but also job interviews, is mistakenly thinking that your goal is to tell them what they want to hear. That is not creative in any way, shape, or form. So what you're saying is, no matter what, be creative with your answer. Be authentic, certainly. Don't be creative just for creativity's sake, but be authentic. And that's the way that you begin to stand out, is by looking at that question, not so much, this is what I did, this is what I did. Glenn, it goes back to, it's not what you're known as, it's what you're known for. In other words, I became a leader. I was the captain of this team, and I was, okay, great. But what was that experience like, and how does it move you forward?
I have to say that you've already done that. You've already listed that you're the captain. You've already listed that you're the president. We now want to talk about how that's influenced you, how that's impacted you, how you've impacted the particular. And another point is that we often also think that we have to have a formal title to attach that trait or skill set to. So if I was the president, then I, was patient with those that I worked with, whatever the case may be. If I was a club member and I did something that stood out in any way, I can still own that leadership. It's not the president's leadership that I followed. It was my own leadership.
Let's talk about 17-year-olds getting ready for undergrad and 22-year-olds getting ready for postgrad, and understanding that this is a business transaction. And not maybe and looking at the epidemic of student loans, because when you may look good to go to UCLA and it may seem awesome, but if you can go to UCI, UC San Diego, something like that, and be not in debt or half in debt, or going to a law school where maybe one school is going to give you a full ride and the next one you're going to come out $200,000 in debt, and maybe you're going to do environmental law that doesn't make a lot of money.
Right. I absolutely agree with that. So 2 different gears. So undergrad will probably provide you the most scholarship you'll receive, especially that first year. That's just how we move forward, at least in the US. If you've done stellar in that particular institution, they'll continue to give you funding, no doubt, something. But again, you have to do well in school. Just because you got in doesn't mean you're going to stay there by some magical way. You have to do well in school. You have to continue to do well in school.
We have talked on various episodes of Blabbit about the topic of limiting beliefs. So you, as a plateau breakthrough coach, when I say the word limiting beliefs, what is the first thing or the first few things that immediately come to mind that you've experienced with the people that you work with?
I was just on a call yesterday where one of the limiting beliefs is I don't have a college degree. That can be one of those things that can hold really successful professionals back from taking that next leap or thinking that they're qualified against other folks. Not to say that that's not an obstacle to overcome, but other ones are, am I really ready for that next level? Is it worth it to jump if I've got something that's working just fine? And, who am I to really be going out there and really pitching myself? I'm not that type of person who can really sell myself. So it's just, I should just stay where I am. Those are some of the things that I see most often.
When you speak about those plateaus, I know in my experience, I see a lot of larger corporations where between director and VP is that level that you were mentioning about with having a degree versus not having a degree. So at what point does experience, knowledge, and expertise outweigh that? Or are most companies just still steadfast in old beliefs that in order to have that VP, you have to have that little initial behind your name?
So it's a good question, and it depends on the company. If you're working for a big old school company that really just needs to follow the rules, you may be out of luck there. But more and more companies I'm seeing are forward thinking, and they value the experience over a degree, especially for someone who's made it through to the director level and have proven themselves. And it's at this point when I talk to my clients, it's like, what do you really want? There's a certain amount being dictated to you, but I think oftentimes folks get to a certain level and they just start to kind of accept the box that they're in, and they stop really fighting for what it is that they want, and they stop really going for what they want with all of their effort. And so it's about really taking that individual and looking at them and being like, okay, what do you really want, and what do you want at all costs, and really going for that. And that changes the conversation a little bit.
Do you also talk to them about that life-work balance? Because I've seen a lot of friends that I've known for 20, 30 years that strive to want that VP level at larger companies. And then once they receive it, they realize my life was better at the other one, even at less pay, because now I'm working 80 hours a week versus 50 hours a week.
If it is a VP role that does have 80 hours and you know that that's not going to align with how you work, then that's probably not the right goal for you. And that comes back to climbing the right mountain. So a lot of us and a lot of the people I talk to have been following this path of external validation and what society and culture deems as success. And they get to that top of the mountain. They're like, wait, this is it? This is not what I was supposed to feel like when I got here. So oftentimes there's this reevaluation that needs to occur about, okay, what do I really want to be doing? And what is my intuition? What does my spirit? What does my soul tell me? I mean, I'm deep into tactics, but I got a little bit of woo. So I'm happy to talk about that with my clients.
So when you talk about creating a dream job, are you across the board talking about becoming an entrepreneur? In other words, creating your own business? Or are you saying attracting a job that has the qualities that do, as you say, light you up within some other organization? Could you talk about that just a little bit?
So the answer is yes, Paul.
Yeah.
My offer is worded carefully to allow for both of those, because I don't believe that all of us should go down the entrepreneurial path, or we could be an entrepreneur inside of a company. And I think there are a lot of great growth opportunities within corporate confines out there. So it depends on the person and it depends on the case. And I like working with both people to help them realize what their next best step is. And for some people, it is starting their own thing. For some people, it's A, getting that next best job, and then B, starting that side hustle to help them get on a trajectory that they're more aligned with. And for some people, it is just, hey, I want to go from VP to senior VP or to the C-suite, and figuring out the combination to get them there.
So when you look at that why and determination, if I'm going to go up the corporate ladder or if I'm going to go do my own thing, what couple of questions or what couple of things can you talk with someone about to help them identify personally what their best path forward is?
Well, the first question is, what do you want?
Ooh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Because you have that what I want and what I need, and sometimes they butt heads.
They sure do. Yeah. There's a reality of paying bills, and there's the reality of putting food on the table. So first, we want to figure out what someone really wants, because if you are constantly not listening to what you want and you're just going through the motions, then you will be denying part of who you are for long periods of time.
In my experience, really the driving force was having a need to be of service. Because for the longest time, I had spent many decades working as a performer and doing all sorts of, entertainment type things and presentational type things. And I realized that what was really missing was the purpose. Like, what is the purpose of this? Just to entertain, though that is fine. That's fine. But it wasn't enough for me. What I needed to do was to be able to help other people tell their stories rather than me telling mine.
I think that purpose is something that a lot of us don't take the time. I mean, I've seen too many people that I call have title envy. They're worrying about this title and that title without knowing if they're even making any more money or if it's helping them in their lives because they're chasing a title. So for anyone watching this or watching this in the future, what will be one or two things that you would share with them to say, this is what you might want to ask yourself to help identify that purpose?
You guys heard of the concept of do, be, have versus have, do, be? Mm-hmm. I'll go over that really quickly. Most people in, let's just call it the rat race, spend their time in do, have, be. I need to work more. I need to do more so that then I can have that next title. I can have that raise. So then I can be happy and be fulfilled, right? But then they just end up doing more, and then they get the stuff and they're not really happy. And then they wonder why they don't have those states of beings that they're striving for. So for someone looking for more purpose, taking that paradigm of be, do, have, where you start with, who do I get to be today? So for example, I get to be more confident, I get to be more playful, I get to be more present, I get to be more impactful. Those are things that I want to embody more. And we get to ask ourselves from that place, what do I get to do? I get to show up here and be my best. I get to figure out what's going to be most impactful in my business and clients. And then from that doing, you either have or you get the results you want, or you don't, but you're not attached to the outcome. So in living a more purposeful life, when we focus on our states of being rather than the outcome, and we focus on the journey rather than any specific goal, not that we shouldn't have goals that are important, but we allow ourselves a lot more happiness and fulfillment.
When dealing with these busy professionals that may have an ego or two, what's the first steps that you would go through to talk to them to identify organizational issues, and then something, maybe a quick tip or two to help them get started down the right path?
It's very simple. It's not rocket science, which is, again, when you have people who are highly educated, like attorneys and lawyers, solicitors, they feel like it should be this really complicated set of rules or steps in order to get organized. Very basic. Okay, how are we going to start your morning? And really, the morning is too late. You gotta hit that puppy the night before. The night before, you organize what you're going to do. This is what I have my clients do. What are you going to do tomorrow before you leave the office? Because if you go into the office and you're now going to organize your day, the phone is ringing, you've got emails, you have whatever, the day has gotten away from you, and you never get to even sit down to make your list of what you're going to do for the day. So therefore, the night before is when you start to organize your day.
The natural impulse at the end of a really difficult day or a very busy day to just want to say, that's it. So it becomes a real discipline to be able to say, well, wait, this was a strenuous day, or it was a busy day, a very work-loaded day, but I need to do myself the favor of figuring out what I'm going to do, at least the first couple of steps.
One of the things that works for my clients is that I hold them accountable.
Mm-hmm.
They really actually tell me what they're going to do. Okay, what are the top 5 things you're going to do tomorrow? Or what are the top things you're going to do this week? And then looking at what are when you first get into the office, what is the most difficult thing to do? And in many cases, that is client development. It is going out there and trying to do some rainmaking. And if you think that you're going to get your day going and then you're going to, it's 1 o'clock, I better do some rainmaking, it rarely happens. So if you have that as a discipline first thing in the morning, is that I'm going to, and it's not a big deal. What is most important is the consistency.
I am the person that starts off the day and my productivity wanes as the day goes on.
Mm-hmm.
My better half hates mornings and eases into her day, and her productivity escalates as the day goes on. So do we have to identify some of those inner traits of ourselves and find out how to A, enhance them, and B, maybe correct some of them, or find ways to be more productive throughout the day?
We all have body clocks, and we do have to acknowledge what our body clocks are. A lot of people are not morning people. A lot of my clients are not morning people, and they may be night owls. However, with that said, when you work in the legal profession, it is a morning-oriented profession. Court is in the morning. You have to if you work for a firm, you have to get in there early in the morning. I literally have to help some of my clients rewire their brains, because how that works for getting into the office late has been just excruciatingly painful. So you really have to, in many cases, although, if you know that your peak, say for example, is like 1 o'clock, maybe that's when you'll eat your frogs, maybe, but you still, when you're in a profession like the legal profession, it's very, very unusual if they can rewrite how their practice was run based on, I'm not a morning person.
Now, when you talk about stress and reducing stress, I know that there can often be a perception that stress is something that is to the point of anxiety, to the point of breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
But aren't there little drips that lead to stress? I mean, the feeling is, well, I'm stressed out, but there are little steps along the way. Are there things that we should look out for besides just being organized, but I guess stressors that we may not be aware of?
Well, let's just start off with defining stress, anxiety, and depression. So stress is outside. It's something that there are stimulants outside of us that are real, that cause us to be stressed out. That means that our body chemicals, we're in fight or flight mode because of deadlines, because of demanding career, demanding clients, deadlines, overload, work overload. That is stressful. The next thing is anxiety. Anxiety is what happens inside of us that occurs based on our perception of what's going on outside. We're getting a lot of cortisol in our body. We're getting a lot of adrenaline, and that's anxiety. And if we're not careful, if we have chronic stress, we're constantly having racing hearts, and we're having high blood pressure and heart palpitation and chronic indigestion and fatigue, and all of those things are the internal workings based on stress. I'm not going to allow that stressful situation, that this is my job, to now have me have sleepless nights and all of these feelings inside that now is leading, now I got to go do the Lions again, that sort of thing, which now leads to a whole bunch of other stuff. So the nature, when lawyers practice law, the nature of law is taming lions. It's being in the arena. And so now let's look at how we can reframe what's going on so that it does not lead to chronic anxiety and depression.
One of our listeners just wanted to know if you were following him around because he said it was insightful.
Yeah, I do. A lot of lawyers say that, or professionals say that. I do work with some professionals as well, but they do say, you're like right inside my head.
What are some of the more slightly different challenges that you see businesses facing right now? What are some of those biggest obstacles?
I say this to clients, and I say this to pretty much everybody I know right now, is if you're thinking about growth next year, and you should be, think hard and fast about where your people are going to come from, because it's really, really challenging. The traditional ways of just posting and interviewing are probably not going to work. And if they do, you're not probably going to get the type of people you want. And so consequently, I think that's one of the bigger challenges going forward, is just going to be, don't be surprised if 2022 for a lot of people is going to be a pretty good year, sort of bouncing back from the pandemic. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have the people to support the additional business, that's going to be a little bit, it's going to be a big challenge.
Inevitably, I see businesses go through cycles where they get so mirrored in working in their business instead of on their business that they have a hard time growing because they're not planning, like you said, for the next move, next quarter, next half year, and what like that. So what's the first thing you would do to talk with somebody to kind of explain to them how to focus on growth and still manage and run their business at the same time?
One of the issues, especially if it's an owner-managed business where they've been in the business for a few years, they're the ultimate doer. They're the ones that like doing the tinkering. They like working in the business. Getting them to work on the business can be a bit of a challenge until you get them to start thinking about, they're not necessarily the best at blank, whatever, it is that they do. They could be a digital marketer. They could be an attorney. They could be, any number of, they could make widgets, and trying to convince them that, listen, you can get people to do that for you. In fact, the value that you provide to your business is a lot greater than that individual task that you're currently still doing.
Yeah, and do you think, 1 second, Glenn, I have one more quick bite here, and that is, I know, and that is the clarity. Do you find, and now we're going to compare notes a little bit, because Glenn and I have talked about this quite a few times, about simplifying things and making the concepts really easy to understand, making the concepts easy to resonate with the people that you want to affect a change with. And I have to keep reminding people, the concepts are simple. The concepts are easy. The execution is what's hard.
We're just a creature of our own habits a lot of times. So a lot of times we know the right things to do, we just don't choose to do them. Or if we try and do them, we do them inconsistently, or we do them for a week and then sort of go on to something else. Mm-hmm. And so to your point, it's usually the little things done consistently make all the difference in the world. And so there's a book out there called The One Thing. So what is the one thing you need to do? And the one thing that I find with that is that a lot of times it's just what are you doing consistently to sort of get things done so that incrementally over time, you're actually, it's like compound interest. It's actually turning into something that's quite significant. So it doesn't have to be earth shattering. It doesn't have to be sort of the big thing. It just has to be something that you're doing on a consistent enough basis where you're going, you know what, I can start seeing the traction. I'm starting to see the needle move. And, if you do that, that's far better than, trying to hit the home run every time.
So for consistency, to get away from a 5-day business shelf life for an idea, and to make changes in your business from habits, kind of like going to a gym.
Mm-hmm.
How do you coach people to say we need to do this for X amount of time and do it consistently to know if we have a win or if we need to tweak something, as opposed to just going off in different directions 3 or 4 times a month?
Oh, that was a great question. You guys ever read the book, the 12-week year? So the idea behind that is just, again, what are the things you need to do? 12 weeks really is just a time period where you're measuring everything you do over a 12-week period. I really like taking clients through what are the things you need to do to get traction in your business over the next 3 months, 12 weeks, whatever it ends up being. And we scorecard it out so that it's done every day. If it's something has to be done every day, let's make sure you're doing it every day. And at the end of each day, everybody's got to keep track of, did I go to a networking event? Did I follow up with people? Did I make those cold calls I say I was going to make? That sort of stuff. And then at the end of the week, when it's time to take score, then you start seeing, is it done? Isn't it done? And then if it's consistently done, because again, everybody said habits are built over, if you ask anybody, it could be 15 days, 20 days, 30 days, 60 days. Everybody has a different opinion on it. But at the end of the day, if you're doing something consistently enough, like you said, going to the gym, for example, it just will become a natural consequence of what you do. And so getting people to feel comfortable to really, and again, this is my left brain coming out, but keep track of individual activities over a certain period of time ingrains that in them, and then they start seeing the results. Once they start seeing the results, they're going, this is what I've been looking for, and then they keep doing it.
How do you guide someone to be able to clarify what their vision is? And is there, how do you determine whether their vision is big enough, whether they're willing to take enough of a risk, or whether they want to play it safe? And that could be a problem.
I'm a big proponent of the idea that, if you don't know where you're going to go, any road will take you there. And so just having an idea where people want to sort of drive the bus, like, do you want to be biggest, baddest, best? Do you want to sell your business in 3 to 5 or 10 years time? Do you want to be sort of the, preeminent company in your industry, like locally, statewide, nationally? Like where is this going to go? Because it's really, again, when you think about it, it's going to color some of the decisions you make in year 3, 5, 7, 10, but it's also going to color what you do in the current year. And once you sort of have that vision set, you're still going to have to revisit it periodically, but it's not something you have to revisit every week or every month, but it's just something that's guiding it at least in the right direction.
What would we start off by doing to making sure that we have a brand, that we've positioned ourselves as an authority in the marketplace for people that are looking up and seeing who we are?
It doesn't happen overnight, but a lot of people don't put in that work to do it. They think, oh, I'll just put up a LinkedIn profile and I'll be terrifically branded. And it doesn't work like that. You need to really understand what your unique value proposition is. And one quick and easy way to do that is to ask some other people how they see you and have them do that in a few words. And that gives you a quick read on what you're all about.
Now, Wendy, when you're speaking to people about branding, how much work do you have to do on let's throw out the term avatars. In other words, who is your ideal client? Because I know, again, I've been guilty of this. Trying to reach out and target everyone is a huge mistake.
That is so true, Paul, that if you target everybody, you really end up targeting no one because people are not clear what you're about. So you really want to niche, you want to focus on a particular area. So, for example, you may be an executive coach as opposed to just a coach. And you may, as an executive coach, focus on C-suite people. So you're very targeted in terms of who you're reaching out to, plus all your communications make sense for the audience that you're targeting, and you brand yourself as that executive coach for C-suite executives. And that makes a world of difference because people immediately know what you're about. You're focused on whom you're targeting, and your marketing is landing with the right message.
There's a reason why bigger brands deliver something that's going to resonate with people because they test things before they do things. How do you help business owners or people kind of test their marketing or their message or their brand to understand that it's going to be something that's going to be received well on the other end? Because I think a lot of times we deliver messages that people really don't care about.
That's very true, that a lot of times we end up talking to ourselves. People are not really getting what we're saying. And the way you do that is, one, it's helpful to get feedback from somebody else. So you may want to hire a coach who can provide that outside perspective because we all tend to put on blinders. The other thing is testing. So you go out with a message, you're finding people are not responding, you can then start tweaking it and see what happens when you do that. Some of it is simply trial and error.
Well, Glenn, you brought up a really interesting topic, which is case studies. And we've heard it before that people believe almost none of what you tell them, a little bit about what others tell them, and everything that they tell themselves.
I urge all my clients to get case studies because, like you said, Paul, it's one thing if you're saying you're terrific, but it doesn't really mean much. But if a happy client says you were made a huge difference in their life or their career, that is a big selling point. And people want to get those case studies. Also, video case studies, or at least having the photo of the person, makes them a lot realer. Otherwise, it's just a quote out there. So you really want to make it as tangible and enticing as possible.
You see a lot of people that maybe don't have 3 master's degrees or postgraduate degrees and things like that. At what point does your experience as you're branding yourself and creating a persona outweigh that education? And what kind of balance do you help people kind of suggest to when they're promoting themselves and selling on experience versus education?
Education is great, but it's not a selling point. And I find oftentimes, particularly older people, and I put myself in that category, we're so focused on those credentials. And unless you're delivering results, they mean nothing. No one cares. Plus, it was in the past. So what you want to focus on is the particular results that you deliver, the value you're creating for other people, the benefits they get from working with you.
So let me ask this question of both of you, and I'll start with Glenn, then we'll go to Wendy. Okay, overall impression when it comes to marketing, social media, easier or harder than it used to be? What do you think?
Yes, it's easier to share. It's harder to get in front of your people because social media is a fallacy. These are marketing companies that use the perception of social media to get people on there so they can sell things. Right. So with any of them, we see whether you're looking at LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and you have a circle, you're lucky if 10% of the people are going to see anything you share.
I think in some ways it's become more difficult, in some ways easier. What I find is that LinkedIn is a terrific platform. While Twitter and Facebook are nice and good to have and a way to communicate to others, I find, particularly if you're a coach, a consultant, a small business owner, which is my target area, that LinkedIn gives you an incredible way to target those people, particularly if you get the Sales Navigator, the paid version of LinkedIn. You can be honed in on who your audience is. And I find that if you're delivering the right message, people, not everybody, of course, will respond, but you'll get a decent percentage of people responding, wanting to connect with you, wanting to hear more.
The question on everybody's minds, and I knew that I could not answer it as well as you could, but please tell us, what is a power song? And oh my goodness, do I need one?
Well, Paul, I don't know. You look like you've got it all together, but it must be the public speaking training and all that stuff that you've done. But yeah, a power song is really a tool that you use to create, to show up fully as your best self. So you're more present, you're just more alive, you have higher energy, you're best. There's kind of like the little version, of Lowry or Paul, says, excuse me, would you mind telling time, and or it's like, hey, what time is it? Come on, let's go, right? And so the power songs are they're like an affirmation, like a musical affirmation, and they're about 8 lines long, not too long, so that like not a whole song, but long enough to kind of cover a lot of ground and make a declaration about who you are at your best and what you want in your life and what you want to have and stuff like that.
What intrigues me with this is I've been around people for years that have used these sayings, things like this, to help motivate them, to get them through different things. And when you add music to it, it seems to me that it would relate more to the subconscious, because every one of us has had that time when that song's been stuck in our head and we can't get away from that. So by doing it with a note, with a tune or whatever, does that help your conscious and your subconscious kind of relate to one another?
Well, I don't really know the answer to that, but what I do know is that it makes it easier to remember, for one thing, right? Like, I hate mission statements. These mission statements and people spend hours agonizing over different words and stuff like that. And then they're so completely cerebral. They're not in your body at all. I mean, John Lennon could have said, what's really required here on the planet is for more people to have affection and kindness and caring towards each other, right? He didn't, like, a whole bunch of bigger words and all that kind of stuff. He said, grade 5, songwriting language, all you need is love. Real love, love in every moment. Real joy, dancing in the truth. I stand strong, earth beneath my feet. I'm glittering like gold, and nothing's gonna hold me back. I'm glittering like gold. It's a pretty different experience when you add the music. And even if you don't sing it in tune, it doesn't matter.
No, but what's interesting is when people do sing, I think that they realize that so much more of their persona, more of, in fact, their physicality has to go into it.
Exactly.
Just in order to produce that sound, you've got to be more grounded in the things that you're saying.
That's exactly it, Paul. And I'm sure that's the kind of work that you do with your clients, right? It's the physicality of like, I mean, the King's Speech, you got that thing behind you, and how he stuttered, and it was such a, when he could just calm down, when he could, change his physiology. So
yes.
that's the thing that's different with affirmations, because it's or even mission statements. It's, they're effective to a point, but you add music and you're changing your physiology. You're changing a lot. Somehow you get this little sense of power back, and it's kind of like, well, then maybe I could do this too, and there's something about if these little triggers that if we can just kind of break those cycles of negative thought, and then we start making things better.
Well, I think we're our own worst critics. We're our own worst enemies a lot of times, because I can't tell you how many times in the past I've been talking to somebody about a potential meeting with a potential client, and I hear the old what you never want to hear. Well, what if this happens? Well, what if they ask this? Well, what if that happens? And I said, well, what happens if they want to buy? What happens if they want to do this?
Yeah.
Our mind is triggered, I think, and trained almost for a lot of people to say, what if the negative happens, instead of thinking, what if the positive happens?
Sure. And those all kind of fall into the category of self-sabotage. I saw this list. I was really interested to see this list of like 14 things that we do. And one of them is catastrophizing, right? I've spent a lot of my life catastrophizing, imagining the worst thing that could happen. What if limiting beliefs, thinking you couldn't do that, thinking, putting glass ceilings on where we can go, failing to recognize our small amounts of progress, incremental progress. There's just so many of those kinds of things.
What's so interesting is we're talking about something very specific to certainly performing, but it has relevance for everyone in terms of when they feel like they're performing, when they feel like they're in the spotlight, those moments where all the eyes are on me. Okay, that's psychologically, that's a shrinking moment, but it's the exact moment where you're supposed to expand.
We have those moments when we think about our goals and our dreams, and you say, oh, I want a house on the ocean. Oh, I'd like to have a house, but I don't really deserve one. And what are the chances of that? It's kind of like, it's like, I've got a house on the water. Like, and so, never mind the crowd, like who we have to manage is our own brain. Right. And that keeps us small and keeps us from going after stuff. I could never do that. Oh, she would never, they'd never, I could, that whole thing. It's like, how do we step into, the life that we want? And I just love the idea that it's like, maybe I could. What if I could, deliver a speech? What if I could make more money? What if I could have a beautiful relationship?
Yeah. It is that process of giving yourself permission.
Yes. And then giving yourself tools to deal with, because as soon as you set your bar higher, then you're going to come up against all of these reasons, all of the doubt and all of the self-sabotage that keeps us, small. And how do we, we need tools, just tools to keep ourselves moving forward, right? Just to keep moving forward, not to give up.
Right.
Well, and you talk about these things moving over, just as you were talking about the different things to get ready to perform, whether you're doing music on stage, whether you're speaking in front of a group, it's no different than our lives every day when we're talking to this computer, we're having these video calls. Yeah. I know I try and make sure I take a minute or two prior to everyone I'm on to do the breathing exercise that Paul shared with before, calming myself down, clearing my mind, and then I'm on to perform in front of this camera to whomever I'm speaking with.
Yeah, and keep breathing. Like I just noticed, I just took a big... I just took a breath now, and why couldn't I? When we're here, we maintain this level of presence, with these tools. They just become kind of part of you integrate them, right?
They do. We want to be at our best, in these moments.
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit more with us about kind of a hair analysis and some things that it's going to share with people and kind of help them determine what they should be doing with their lives?
I'm looking at mineral levels because we're all made up of minerals. And if they're too low, we have to rebuild those. I'm looking at heavy metal toxicity because we're exposed to it throughout our food and the air and everything we encounter, even cleaning products. I'm looking at cellular glucose to make sure that nobody is trending towards a pre-diabetic state because it's different than your blood sugar. It's what's stored up in case you need a backup. I'm looking at thyroid health from the brain all the way through to making T3, which is the hormone that gives us energy. Adrenal health. So if someone is in a burnout situation or a fight or flight all the time, I can tell on a cellular level if they're just on fire and they need to rest more mentally and physically. Cellular membrane, which is that outer membrane. We actually have two of them on the outside of our cells. And I don't want anyone to be too ghostly. And I do want to touch on that with COVID and zinc. And I don't want it to be too thick or else we can't get our nutrition and our oxygen in there. And it's an inflammatory marker at the cellular level. So you can see when something's completely down the road. I want to make sure nobody has muscle loss, especially after we start hitting 40, 50, me included. And I want to gear their diet and their supplements toward their metabolism.
What would you say is something that most people overlook when it comes to their nutrition? Would you say that there are some red flags that that most people miss?
Inflammatory foods such as grains, dairy, and probably soy, which surprises some people. And that gets tough on a vegetarian side because we do eat a lot of soy. But the grains cause a lot of gut inflammation because they're soaked in glyphosate, which is Roundup, sometimes 3 times before they're harvested. It causes leaky gut, which leads to Crohn's, celiac, IBS, all those situations. The dairy, that does the same thing. And what most people don't understand is dairy is like crack to parasites, okay? So when they eat dairy, they get bloated. It's not necessarily a reaction to the dairy, but the parasites are coming out to have a party.
I remember in a psych class when I was young, learning that the Missouri River had more lithium than any other drinking water in the country. And anyone that knows about your anatomy knows if you start producing something that your body normally produces, it may stop producing it. And you don't know if it will start producing it at the proper levels when it doesn't have that outside influence.
Right. Same thing happens with thyroid medication. So the folks I work with that want to get off that thyroid medication, if your thyroid's getting it for free, it's not going to put the energy to make it. So the goal is to support and feed your thyroid so it can heal itself. And then you can drop down on that medication milligram until one time you don't need it. I've had that happen many times. Yep. Lithium can come from seafood as well. And you can get a high lithium. It's kind of like the happy thing that's in anti-depression drugs. And fluoride. That's, again, linked to the water.
We're all familiar because we do our annual checkups. We're all familiar with blood tests. But what is the difference? What are you looking for? Or what is the difference between a blood test and a hair analysis test?
So a blood test is like a snapshot picture of you right now. In a week, you could break out all over your face. Things change. So they change constantly. You could eat a Snickers bar, and then you could test your blood in 5 minutes and look diabetic. The hair test is like a short film of what's happened in your life over the last month on a cellular level. So it's a deep look into what's really going on underneath at the bottom of the ocean before it hits the top. So your blood work is kind of like your checking account, where if you run low on something, it'll borrow from your ready reserve and make sure your levels all look pretty. But when your savings is tapped out, you're in trouble because there's no loan.
When we have a cold and flu season, when you have anything going on around us, a lot of people know that their immune systems are increased by having the proper nutrition that we don't get from our food like we used to. So what should people be doing to be healthier from a mineral standpoint, a nutrition standpoint, to try and fight off bugs that are out there in the world?
At the very least, you want to increase your vegetable intake because that's where all our nutrients are at. There's not all the B vitamins and the good things that we need in meat and fat. So you want to increase your vegetables in a large variety, from the root, the leafy greens. You just want to mix them all up and get lots of sources all day long. You can freeze them. I can go in the deep end of the pool with that. But you want to increase your vegetables, make sure you're hydrated, as you mentioned too. And a quality supplement, the problem is you don't know which supplement is best for your body unless you know your biochemistry. So you could be taking something that's pushing your adrenals harder because it has a lot of B vitamins in it, which we all know is good. But if you're already on fire and you have B vitamins, it just pushes your adrenals harder. It's like throwing gas on fire.
We touched on something that one of our coaches talked about, and I'm going to bring this up, not expecting that you probably have perspective on this. And he was talking about there being nerve centers in the body, 3 of them altogether. There's your head, your heart, and your gut, and how important that is. And when the gut isn't right, the rest of the body isn't going to be right either. And I think it's the one that we probably neglect the most. What's your perspective on that?
Definitely. Our gut is called the second brain, but I think it's our first brain because it was formed before our brain and our head.
Yeah.
And we have trillions of bacteria that are good and beneficial that are talking amongst themselves, and 2 viruses, and they're trying to protect us as the host. And we need to listen to that. We need to feed it, and we need to nurture it and listen to it. So many people are dull now, and they're not listening to their gut with symptoms physically. And they don't even trust their intuition. If something doesn't feel right, they're like, well, my gut didn't feel right, but I ignored it. We need to tune into our gut. Be it probiotics, prebiotics. We need to listen to it.